Welcome back to Crime Time, Inc. Today, we're going to be looking at LSD,
Okay.
the drug itself,
Right.
and then also some like weird historical events that may or may not be related to it.
Interesting. It's kind of remarkable how LSD,
Yeah,
despite being such a powerful hallucinogen,
right.
it pops up in all sorts of unexpected places throughout history.
Yeah,
Psychiatry,
yeah.
espionage,
Espionage, yeah.
counterculture movements.
Really does.
Makes you wonder how scientific discoveries can take on a life of their own.
It really makes you think about how like one little thing
Right.
can just completely change the course of history.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, okay, let's just break this down from the beginning.
LSD stands for lysergic acid diethylamide.
Whoa.
It's one of those names that sounds a bit like science fiction,
Yeah.
but the effects are very real.
And it's incredibly potent, right?
Yeah.
Like, I read that we're talking like micrograms, not milligrams for an effective dose.
That's right.
Like, that's crazy.
Just 20 micrograms can have a noticeable effect.
Wow.
What's interesting is that LSD is not considered addictive the same way as like other drugs,
Right.
but it can cause some intense psychological reaction, anxiety, paranoia, even delusions.
Really?
And there's also the possibility of HPPD,
HPPD.
or hallucinogen persisting perception disorder.
Okay, so HPPD, what exactly is that?
It's basically the experience of having flashbacks.
Okay.
Visual distortions that can pop up even after the drug has worn off.
Oh, wow.
They can be triggered by things like stress or fatigue.
So you're just walking down the street one day and then all of a sudden
Exactly.
you're back in that trip.
It can be very unsettling,
Yeah.
especially for people who aren't expecting it.
Right.
Yeah.
So LSD has this reputation for being super potent and like having these long-lasting effects.
Right.
How did people even discover this stuff?
It's actually a really interesting story of accidental discovery. Back in 1938,
Okay.
Swiss chemist Albert Hoffman synthesized LSD for the first time.
Okay.
But it wasn't until 5 years later
Yeah.
that he accidentally ingested some
Oh, no.
and realized its mind-altering effects. He later intentionally took a larger dose to confirm its effects.
Wow.
And described it as an incredibly intense experience full of visual distortions and a feeling of being detached from his body.
So like an out-of-body experience?
In a way, yeah. It must have been pretty shocking at the time
I bet.
to suddenly experience reality in such a different way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I find it fascinating how LSD went from this accidental discovery
Right.
to being seen as a potential tool in psychiatry.
Exactly.
Like, how did that even happen?
Well, in the 1950s,
Right, yeah.
Sandoz Laboratories actually marketed LSD as Delucid.
What?
And it was used by therapists to help patients access repressed memories and emotions.
So they're giving this to their patients?
They were, yeah.
Wow.
It was a very different time in terms of how we viewed mental health and the use of psychedelic substances.
That's a pretty big leap from like an accidental trip in the lab.
It is, yeah,
It makes you wonder about the ethical considerations they had at the time.
definitely.
Like, was there any...
Yeah, were they even thinking about that?
Yeah. But speaking of unexpected uses,
Yes.
what about the CIA's involvement with LSD?
Ah, yes.
That always struck me as a really bizarre chapter in its history.
It definitely raises questions about the ethical boundaries of scientific research.
Yeah.
The top secret CIA program that explored using LSD for mind control and interrogation.
Like Manchurian Candidate type stuff.
Exactly. They gave it to unsuspecting subjects.
Oh my gosh.
Which sometimes had devastating consequences.
I bet.
This is where our Harvard article comes in.
Okay.
It features a quote from John Ehrlichman,
Okay.
a White House counsel during the Nixon administration.
Wasn't Nixon the one who launched the so-called war on drugs?
He was.
Okay.
And Ehrlichman admitted that they intentionally demonized drugs to target anti-war protesters and Black communities.
Wow.
He even said, "Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did."
So the government was deliberately using drug policy
As a weapon.
as a way to crack down on dissent.
Yes.
Wow, that's certainly a dark side to this whole story.
It is a very dark chapter.
But before we get too far down that path,
Okay.
let's talk about the 1960s and the role LSD played in the counterculture movement.
Right. LSD became the symbol of rebellion,
Okay.
artistic expression,
Yeah.
spiritual exploration.
Right.
Figures like Timothy Leary and Aldous Huxley really championed its use as a way to expand consciousness.
Yeah, for sure.
Interestingly, Sandoz,
Right.
the company that first marketed LSD,
Okay.
stopped producing it in 1965.
Oh, wow.
But a Czech company called Spofa picked up where they left off, so it was still widely available.
So you have this really interesting dynamic developing.
Yeah.
The government's trying to crack down on LSD.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's becoming like intertwined with this growing countercultural movement.
Almost like a tug of war for the soul of the drug.
It really is.
Yeah.
And now let's look at some historical incidents
Okay.
that might be connected to LSD or more accurately to ergot. What exactly is it?
So ergot is a fungus that can grow on rye and other grains.
Okay.
And it produces a chemical that's structurally very similar to LSD
Oh, wow.
and can cause all sorts of strange and sometimes dangerous effects.
Interesting.
Some researchers have even theorized that ergot poisoning may have played a role in the Salem Witch Trials.
The Salem Witch Trials.
Yeah.
Seriously.
It sounds crazy, but there's some evidence to support it.
How does that connection work?
Well, the summer before the trials began was unusually warm and wet. Perfect conditions for ergot to thrive. And the symptoms of ergot poisoning can include things like hallucinations and seizures, which
Okay.
could have been mistaken for witchcraft at the time.
That's a pretty wild theory.
It is.
Are there any documented cases of ergot poisoning throughout history?
Absolutely.
Oh, really?
There's a record of several deaths in 1762 attributed to ergot poisoning from contaminated grain.
Oh, gosh.
Symptoms were gruesome.
What kind of symptoms?
Things like blackened and rotting limbs.
Oh, my God.
And then there's the 1951 incident in Pont-Saint-Esprit, France.
What happened there?
Dozens of people suffered from delusions and hallucinations,
Really?
and some even died.
Oh, my gosh. What was the cause of that incident in France?
Initially, they thought it was ergot poisoning from contaminated bread,
Okay.
but later a CIA document suggested that it might have actually been a secret LSD experiment.
Whoa.
Yeah, a CIA
Oh,
experiment.
that's unexpected.
It is.
So we have this strange situation where we're not even sure if this mass poisoning was caused by ergot, which occurs naturally,
Right.
or LSD, which was being secretly experimented with by the CIA.
Exactly.
It sounds like we've only scratched the surface of this story.
We definitely have a lot more to uncover. It's amazing how one substance can have such a broad impact, isn't it?
It really is.
From science and medicine to counterculture,
Yeah.
and maybe even shaping historical events.
Yeah, it really makes you think.
It does.
I think what makes LSD so interesting is how it can change the way we see things and like challenge our understanding of what's real.
Right. LSD forces us to confront the limits of our own minds
Yeah.
and question everything we think we know about the world.
And it's really interesting how there's new interest in using it for therapeutic purposes,
Yeah,
even though it's still illegal in most places.
that's true.
Like, how is that even happening?
Well, researchers are discovering new things about how LSD affects the brain.
Okay.
And there's growing evidence that it could help treat various mental health conditions.
So, like, what kind of mental health conditions are we talking about?
Things like anxiety, depression, addiction, even end-of-life distress.
It makes you wonder what other secrets LSD might hold,
It really does.
both in how it works and how it could be used.
I agree.
Like, what else can this stuff do?
I think there's so much we still don't know about LSD
Yeah.
as research continues.
Right?
I'm sure we'll find even more surprising and thought-provoking discoveries.
I'm excited to see what the future holds for LSD research.
Me too.
Who knows? Maybe you'll be widely accepted as a real medicine someday.
It's definitely possible.
That would be amazing.
It would be a testament to the power of science and the human desire to understand the mysteries of the mind.
Well said.
Thank you.
We've talked about the histories of LSD,
Right.
its potential for both good and bad,
Yeah.
even some strange historical events
Yeah.
that might be connected to it.
Definitely.
But what does it actually feel like to be on LSD?
Well, it can vary a lot from person to person.
Okay.
It depends heavily on the set and setting.
Set and setting?
Yeah, their mindset going in and the environment they're in.
Okay.
But generally, people describe visual and auditory hallucinations.
Okay.
Colors might seem brighter,
Right.
patterns swirl, and sounds are amplified or distorted.
That sounds intense.
It can be.
Is it like they're seeing things that aren't really there?
It's more that their perception of reality is altered.
Okay.
They might know that what they're seeing isn't real in the conventional sense,
Right.
but it's still very vivid and real to them in that moment.
Okay.
These are called pseudo-hallucinations.
Pseudo-hallucinations.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not just about weird visuals and sounds.
Right.
What about how it affects people's thoughts and emotions?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
LSD can create feelings of euphoria,
Right.
deep insights,
Yeah.
and a sense of interconnectedness with everything.
Wow.
But it can also trigger anxiety,
Uh-huh.
paranoia, or a feeling of detachment from one's own body.
Sounds like the experience can be pretty unpredictable.
Exactly. That's why the set and setting are so crucial.
Right.
A supportive environment and a positive mental state going in can greatly increase the chances of a positive experience.
So once the drug wears off, do things go back to normal, or are there any lasting effects?
For most people, the acute effects of LSD wear off within 6 to 10 hours.
Okay.
Though some might experience an afterglow for days or even weeks.
An afterglow.
A lingering feeling of well-being or enhanced creativity.
That doesn't sound too bad.
But as we mentioned earlier, there's also the risk of HPBD.
Right. Where people experience flashbacks or recurring visual distortions, which can be very unsettling, especially if they're not expecting it.
So LSD can have both positive and negative long-term effects.
It can.
What about physical effects?
Okay.
Is it harmful to the body?
LSD itself is not physically addictive.
Okay.
And it takes a very large dose to be physically toxic.
Okay.
But there are still some risks.
Okay, what kind of risks?
For example, because LSD can impair judgment and distort perception,
Right.
people might do things that could lead to accidents.
Okay.
And it can worsen existing mental health conditions,
Like
anxiety or psychosis.
Okay, so it's not something to take lightly.
Definitely not.
It's interesting, though, how LSD went from being seen as a potential psychiatric tool to being outlawed in many places.
That's right.
How did that happen?
By the late 1960s, the counterculture movement was fading.
Okay.
Governments were cracking down on drug use.
Right.
And LSD became associated with negative connotations.
In 1968, the U.S. classified it as a Schedule I drug.
Schedule I.
Meaning high potential for abuse and no accepted medical use.
Wow.
Many other countries followed suit.
But now there's this renewed interest in its therapeutic potential.
There is.
What's driving that shift in thinking?
Well, clinical trials are showing promising results. And there's more research into how LSD affects brain activity.
Right.
And potentially even promotes neuroplasticity.
Neuroplasticity.
The brain's ability to change and adapt.
So our brains can actually change based on this drug.
It seems that way, yeah.
Wow, it's amazing how a substance that was once demonized might actually hold the key to helping people heal.
It is pretty remarkable.
Have there been any, well-known figures
Oh, yeah.
who've talked about their experiences with LSD?
Absolutely. Like
Yeah.
Steve Jobs,
Good.
co-founder of Apple, said taking LSD was one of the most important things in his life.
Really?
And that it helped him think differently.
Wow.
Carrie Mullis,
Okay.
a Nobel Prize-winning chemist,
Has also credited LSD with helping him develop a groundbreaking DNA technique. So from tech innovation to scientific breakthroughs.
Yeah.
It sounds like LSD has had a real impact beyond just the counterculture scene.
It has, but it's important to remember that these are just individual accounts.
Right.
More research is needed to fully understand its effects.
So what does the future hold for LSD?
That's the big question.
Could it become a mainstream treatment option?
It's hard to say for sure.
Okay.
There are legal and regulatory hurdles,
Right.
but there's also growing support for decriminalization or even legalization for medical and spiritual purposes.
It's fascinating to think that we might be at a turning point in how we view LSD.
It really is.
So much of its story has been about extremes,
Yeah.
from its potential for harm to its potential for healing.
Exactly. And as we learn more, it's crucial to approach LSD with both caution and a sense of open-mindedness.
Well said.
Thank you.
I think we've covered just about everything there is to say about LSD today.
I think so, too.
It's been a really fascinating discussion.
It has. It really has.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the many facets of LSD.
One person who always seems to be on a trip is Simon. He will be checking in from Australia on Sunday, and he and Tom will be discussing this subject in their weekly review. But in the meantime, tune in tomorrow for another great true crime episode.